a real pleasure to be here at this conference. For Mark and I from Merkle and Scott from Infocore, this is our first time to India, so it's learning a lot, and hopefully today too have a lot of good stories to share with you. So in getting together the panel to discuss what we really want to talk about, extending the value of your database can be a pretty broad subject, and getting acquainted with each other. I think what we discovered is that there's quite a few good success stories and some good case studies here that we could share with you. So that's what we're going to focus on, is try to give you some real life examples of ways that companies are extending the value of their database, using their data to try to better understand their customers and acquire new customers. One of the common conversation that we had is that here in India, it is a challenge to build and extend your database. It can be difficult to capture data depending on what business you're in and how your products are sold. The data that you do capture can be of poor quality, so it can make it difficult for some of the analytics and some of the customer data integration to have that single view of your customers. And then the lack of data availability makes it difficult to get that depth of knowledge about your customers to treat them more relevant. So there's plenty of challenges here, but what we're going to share with you today are some ways around that, if you will, to still be successful. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel to share some of those stories with you. So let's see. Hello. Actually, we're going to make the person who showed up last go first. So if you don't mind, Arvind, we'll have you start.
Okay. I'm Arvindra Kanwal, and I'm the CEO for India.com, and I've been in this space now, I think, 25 years. And my first decade was in FMCG with Unilever, and the rest of the time I've been in the internet space, running portals for media transaction businesses, and I also had a small stint in mobile with SMS Gupshup. That's me. Thank you.
If you don't mind, go ahead and
Sharing my story on...
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't put him on the spot. I apologize. We're going to go ahead and start right into maybe your story of how you are building the value of your database and capturing data.
Fair enough. So there's one insight I thought I should share with the group here. And but to give you some context, India.com is basically a house of brands. We've built out independent sites in auto, education, etc. So in auto, we have an independent site called oncars.in, and it's basically a research site. You come to the site and search for a car, a new car or an old car, and eventually go offline and buy the car. So we used to generate a lot of leads and pass it on to dealers and to brands. And then we found that we were not getting enough value out of it. So we were losing significant value by just capturing leads through different touch points, like test drives and pricing information, and dealer addresses and things like that. So then we said, how do we extend the value of the database? So at that point of time, we said the best way to do it is to try and facilitate the sales of car, capture the full cycle from research information of the car right down to the last point where he sells the car. But before stepping into the market, we said we need to analyze both the inputs and the outcomes of how our traffic has moved. So basically, we analyzed what the users were doing before they filled up a form, what is the kind of content areas they were doing, and then we followed them all the way back and checked when did they eventually buy the car. The whole hypothesis was how do we predict what kind of user behavior leads to a sale of a car and in how much time. So since we were getting a huge volume of leads, 30,000 to 50,000 leads, we had to prioritize them in different buckets. So what is the lead which should be attended to fastest and in that kind of scale. And I'd just like to share the outcome. We found that users who did a comparison of cars and who did a mobile self-verification, they surrendered the mobile numbers and actually verified the mobile number, and they filled in a dealer address, actually went out and bought a car within 10 days. And there were others who filled a form and said they would be looking at buying a car in 3 weeks or a month, and we found 40% of them came back to the site to continue their research. And they normally bought within a 2 or 4 week period also. And we found the other leads took about 30, 40 days to mature. And based on this, we wrote the algorithms to build a predictive model, and the leads started getting funneled out, and that's how we pulled the value of the database out. And I think that's it.
Thank you. I think that's a great example, taking the leads and then coming up with a more targeted approach and then analyzing that and then increasing the value. So thank you. I'm going to now ask Scott to provide a success story.
Thanks, Eunice. So first of all, I'm Scott Newberger. I'm the president of InfoCore. We're an agency in the U.S. that focuses on working with U.S.-based multinationals, helping them enter new markets, connecting them with local data sources and data quality experts in those markets to help them build and extend the value of their marketing databases. It's my first trip to India. I'm very excited to be here and learn so much from everybody here. I hope I can provide some of those learnings back. And what I've been thinking about is comparing what I've learned about the Indian market to other high growth markets. And my early conclusion is that the Indian market is most closely related to the market in China, and it's a market that InfoCore and our partners Merkle have had quite a bit of experience in. So I'm going to share it's an ongoing campaign. It's in its early stages of execution, but it's one that I think is relevant to a lot of people here. And essentially, the problem we're tackling is how to build and extend the value of a marketing database in a market that has limited to no third-party data, good third-party data. This is China. So what we've been doing is we're using telemarketing, which is an accepted channel in China, to make low-pressure calls to customers in raw data sources, essentially just to survey those customers and to identify intent to buy a specific product in the future, and when they might be interested in buying that. And if they, depending on how they answer those questions, are they willing to provide their mobile phone number for follow-up? And for those that do, it's kind of similar to the situation. They then receive a SMS text message, and that SMS text message is incentivizing them to go out and show up at a store, and then after a certain amount of time, there's a follow-up to identify whether or not they had a successful engagement with the store, and then potentially a follow-up, to do it all over again. So this is in its early stages of execution, but it's a way we've been able to essentially build a database where one didn't exist, and then extend the value by continuing to learn more about the customer and engage with the customer. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I think that's a good example too, because several people today have mentioned the effectiveness of using integrated marketing or multiple channels, and so I think that's a good example of that. Next up, I'm going to ask DMAi to share one of her stories.
Thank you, Candace. I had marketing and the online channel at L&T Insurance. We are a relatively new company. And I just wanted to, when we were discussing yesterday, I wanted to share that I completely agreed with what Ajay presented earlier and what Sandeep presented earlier. And I think the challenge that we face today is that if you're starting out afresh, like we did 8 months ago, you not only have to do all the things that you did earlier, but you also have to start building efficiencies. Because one of the slides that we saw earlier about cost of acquisition, where you get great numbers, is because there is acknowledgement amongst the CEOs and the boards that cost of acquisition is very high and that you need to measure customer lifetime value. But the effort that you need to make as a marketer today is that you need to start building efficiencies into the system. And that's where I think it's interesting to be a new player, because we don't have the legacy systems to deal with. So we are implementing new technologies and trying to do new things there. And we're also integrating the technologies. For example, the old school list calling. I'm sure all of you have had experiences, but for Chanda's benefit, I said I'll share some numbers. When we integrated our list calling process, where we just didn't do a cold calling through the tele sales representatives, because that's becoming a very expensive resource in India now, where we integrated SMS, we integrated IVR, and then we did the calling eventually to the warmed up leads, our efficiencies, or rather conversions, went up by about 50%. So, therefore, to re-emphasize, the challenge is not just to build the control groups and the control databases, but also to start doing new things to build efficiencies. Similarly, on issues of callbacks in India, which is a very frequent problem that we face in the financial services space, the callback improvement, again, by an integrated method of where we used an IVR system. We gave options to customers on how they'd like to be contacted back. Our efficiencies actually in terms of conversions went up by about 150%, where essentially the drops that we used to have on the callbacks disappeared because a lot more people came back to us. Normally the norm is that, you've kind of lost in insurance the customer for 15 days, and if he doesn't accept the call back, they don't come back. But through this methodology, we kind of, got all of them back. I think the third point that I'd like to share here is that there is a lot of data stewardship that you need to do inside your organizations to build, to demonstrate, actually. You need to demonstrate it to your CFO, you need to demonstrate it to your CEO, you need to demonstrate it to your board. So measure all the time, and compare all the time, and test all the time, and scale it up is really the answer. But I think we also need to look at other interesting things, which is that you need to have a huge buy-in also from the traditional channels. So I remember from my HSBC days that we wanted to actually build a database of email IDs of our customers, because we would save a huge amounts of money if we were not to send the physical account statement. And we actually couldn't manage it completely on our own. We could only manage it the moment we incentivized the offline channel for acquisition of the email ID. We actually ended up paying them 25% more than the normal commission structure that you would have for the acquisition of the email ID. And it worked fantastically well for us, because the cost saving that you would ensue in a year completely paid off for it. So it's not just about efficiencies and getting more business and acquisition. I think there's a lot of cost-saving programs that you can also run which demonstrate the value of the databases that you have.
Thank you. I think, I know many of you may have questions for DMAi after. She's got a lot of good ideas and have tried a lot of things, and I think off to a really great start for your company. So thank you for sharing that. Next, I'm going to ask Mark Finelli to provide some additional stories for us.
Hello, my name is Mark Finelli, representing Merkle. Our business is primarily in the realm of building and hosting marketing databases for some of the world, or the U.S.'s largest multinational brands. So we live in the world of big data, having to integrate data from multiple touch points, making sense of that data, mining it, and helping our clients realize the value or be able to show the value on that investment that they made in that marketing infrastructure. The story I'm going to share with you briefly is one of Dell. So Dell is a client of Merkle's. We house all of their transaction and customer information globally. And we do this for a number of, over 100 organizations, and inevitably it's the same conversation whenever one of these companies wants to use their data in the database to deploy CRM tactics in a market or become active in a market outside the US. We find that the data quality is poor, or there's no third-party data. They don't necessarily know who their customers are and how they can be relevant. And so just sort of picking up on what AJ was saying before, that was very much, live in that world every day. And certainly we've been here over the last few days learning that in the Indian market that is a particular challenge. So for Dell, the initiative that we were charged with undertaking was Dell has developed 4 proprietary segments of consumers. Why, right? So they can be more relevant in the way they communicate with them, both from an outbound and an inbound standpoint. So those segments get injected everywhere they can at every customer touch point. When it comes to looking at markets that are, as Scott was talking about, that are light in data, it's hard to segment these customers. So places like China or Mexico or India, it becomes very, very difficult. So, in these markets, we've been able to look to other tactics, right, where you don't have household or person level data, you don't have the matching capabilities that you may have in Europe or North America, and so on and so forth. That requires a bit of a different approach, if you will. The tools that we're using this, and I'm going to tag team a bit here with Shiv because he's doing a lot of this in his business, but we have the ability to geocode, right? And so in the case of Dell, being able to take latitude and longitude and break cities like Shanghai or Mumbai into small grids, right? And then using third-party information to the extent it's available, or it could be market research information that you then use analytics to extrapolate over that grid surface and enrich the customer database with that third-party information, albeit modeled and interpolated, but it's certainly better than nothing and allows, in this case, Dell to segment their 1 million customers in India into their segments. So hopefully we'll see in the near term data quality, and I know there are companies here at the show that specialize in address standardization and matching, and hopefully we'll see third-party data, good quality third-party data, make itself more available. But in the absence of that, you always have sort of geographic means, if you will, or the power of GIS to help compensate where individual or household level data is missing. And then from a sort of categorically across the globe, Dell, from the targeted communications they see from these segments tend to generate 30 to 50% the yield that a non-targeted communication, whether it's an inbound or outbound touch, generates. So it's been very successful for them, hence the need to continue to refine that segmentation, continue to refine the accuracy of it, and be able to classify their customers as early as they can in the capture process.
Thank you. And I know Shivalik with DMAi India will have some additional, I think, comments to make on top of that, and then some other stories too.
Hi everyone. It's late in the afternoon and it's Raksha Bandhan, so many of you might be leaving early today. I'm Shivalik. I'm Director VP at DMAi India, and we are an interesting company. In essence, we've been in the data space or the geographic mapping data space for the last 17 years. And if anyone has traveled in India, they do realize that making maps or location information is very, very complex. Most people don't realize India is so large that you can fly for 3 hours and still be within India, right? If you're flying from Srinagar to Cochin, it's more than a 3-hour flight, and you're still within India. Most parts of India are different. So what works in Bombay does not work in Chennai, does not work in Calcutta, and does not work in Delhi, right? And so I've been with the firm for about 6.5 odd years, and used to work in IBM before that. And when I joined MapMy India, I realized we have a huge repository of data. Means we have house number details at about 50, 60 cities. Every house is plotted in a country where 80% of the roads have no names. But that doesn't mean people don't send post here, or that doesn't mean people don't navigate here. But we took this data and we had a core set of clients at MapMy India, and we said, we went to a lot of companies and said, do you want to use this location data? Do you want to take an address of a customer in your database and do you want to map it? And most of the customers would say, you know what, yeah, good stuff, but don't need it. Because most of the companies have been growing at about 30, 40% compounded for the last decade. But, so we took the same database and we created navigation products for ourselves. And we applied the same logic that we were helping customers with, and we landed up building the 3rd largest automotive distribution network in India for cars. And we basically ate our own pie, right? We made our own products, we made our own GPS, we made our own apps, and we started growing. And we have grown phenomenally over the last 3-4 years. But what is interesting, in the last 2 years, lots of companies started coming back and said, Shiva, can you help me get this location GIS mapping? And I have a 20 million customer database. I have a regulation from IRDA. I need to figure out if it's a rural address or an urban address. And can you help me figure that out? Because I don't really know if it's urban or rural, because this is kind of part of the city now. And what I've been seeing over the last 2 years, specifically 2 years, is there's a huge demand from companies wanting to process a lot of the data that they have collected over the last decade, which was not the case some years ago. There's a lot of pressure on profits, and unlike the US, or I was discussing with some folks, Korea or Japan or something, India is a very, very complex country in essence. Every part of India is different. But if you take the Airtels, the HDFCs, the Kotaks, the ICICI, many of these companies have a lot of data, and now they're actually plotting them on a map and trying to build segmentation models around it, and trying to see if, what is the next locality next to T Nagar in Chennai? Is it normally, if a locality is well off, the neighboring locality also might be well off. So these are the kind of things that we have been building, and we've been working with a lot of multinationals who have been coming to India in the last 5-7 years, and they're quite successful. India, even though a ticket size is very small in, let's say, a telecom circle of $1.50 a month is what an average ticket size is. Even then, Vodafone generates about $10 to $12 billion from India. So there is a huge market, and just imagine the market, even at a 7% growth rate, a $10 billion business will become a $20 billion business. A Coke generates about 15% of global revenues from India. So it's a very large market and fairly complex. And something which I think is exciting for everyone sitting in this room, a lot of the data and value addition on data and direct marketing, because you're inundated with campaigns in India. If you live in Bombay or Mumbai, you'll see a hoarding, I guess, pretty much every 200 meters in the city, especially if you're on the Western Express Highway. Lots and lots of information coming in. And what we have seen is we've tried everything. We have tried BTL, ATL, we have put our own direct sales team, we have done direct mailers, we have done our own campaigns using all sorts of algorithms. And we have literally tried everything on our own database. And now we're extending whatever we've learned to some of our customers. So yes, there is a lack of database in India, unlike what an Axiom or a Claritas, etc., would have in the US. But it'll get there, and I think it'll get there much sooner than most people expected. Change happens when you're sleeping. That's kind of how I look at it. And no one expected India to have 500 or 700 million cell phones. I remember in 2001, and calling was very expensive in India, and there were very few cell phones. And people used to say, oh, this is just for the rich and the fancy, and just a small segment of people in Bombay and Delhi. And I met this guy in IBM, and he's retired now. And this guy in Armonk in New York. And he's like, yeah, you guys can't afford fiber. You have no choice, but you'll have cell phones. And because you'll have so many people buying cell phones, your cost of cell phones will go down. So essentially, by the end of the decade, everyone should have a cell phone in India. And he was about 65 years old that time, must be about 75 now. But amazing. And he was dead right. So same thing I look at in India. As every multinational in India is trying to sell, you have all the car companies, all the phone companies, all the FMCG companies, and trying to sell really hard, highly competitive, as Ajay was pointing out. Lots and lots of data will get built. And at that point of life, a direct selling, a segmentation, more analytics will really kick in. And I think a location piece along that will be very, very critical. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to close our panel for today, I think, you said it very well. The availability of data and getting more sophisticated will come, but I think one of the key things is that hopefully you've heard 5 stories here of how you can get started with what you have today. I mean, from online lead generation to building a database, to using multiple channels, to taking data, maybe not at the individual level, but at a GIS level. It still is additional information to segment and then become more relevant. And in the end, that all results in an increase in response and results, which is what everybody here is trying to achieve for their companies. So I think that these were great stories. I would like to thank very much the panel for participating in this and sharing that. And I would definitely encourage everybody in the audience at the break to, feel free to talk to these folks. I've found their stories to be really interesting, and I know there's a lot more to share than what we had time for today. Okay. Thank you.